Hey everybody, this is a video about grammar and we are going to get to the grammar in a moment. But let's just start with an example because I think the example sometimes makes it easier to understand. Do you remember this scene in the movie that we just finished? This man's name is Gideon and he's following this woman on the horse and he's shouting her name, Minty! And then she's hiding. She comes out from behind the tree and she says, "My name's Harriet." So we have just a very small conversation there, and I want to imagine that we're going to tell this as a story. Okay, so this is a story where people are talking to each other. There are two ways to tell this story. The first way we already know. This is to use the exact words. And if we use exact words, we have to use quotation marks. So the quotation marks means that you're telling other people's words. And in this case, when we write it down, it looks like, "Minty," said Gideon. "My name's Harriet," said Harriet. So just a simple little story there. This sentence is important, but we're going to come back to it later. So the second way to tell the story is to just explain it without the exact words. So I can explain this kind of in different words, and I can say, Gideon called Minty's name. Harriet came out from behind the tree. She told Gideon that her name was Harriet. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is a way that, I'm just explaining what happened. I'm not saying exactly the words that they said. I'm just explaining it in my own words. So what's kind of interesting here is that this sentence, "My name's Harriet," it changes when we just explain it, and it turns into "her name was Harriet." So there's a difference in the grammar here with the two different ways of telling the story. The first way of telling the story is called direct speech. And this second way, where I write it in my own words, or I explain it, but I'm not being exact, that's called reported speech. So direct speech and reported speech, these are both correct, but they're just two different ways of telling a story. So this video is about reported speech, and this is the second way to tell a story. You might be wondering, so what is reported speech? And there is a little explanation in our book. We haven't studied this yet, but we're going to study it very soon. Basically, if you look at this little explanation, the book says, use reported speech to tell what a speaker says without using the exact words. So in this situation, if you just want to explain what someone said in your own way, that's the situation for reported speech. And this is just a little review, but in both direct and reported speech, the verb tell takes an object and the verb say does not. Basically, this means when it says tell takes an object, it means like a thing or a person. After the word tell, we have to say tell him, tell her, tell me, etc. So tell cannot be by itself, it has to have something after it. That's what this means when it says tell takes an object. And then the verb say does not. So when you use the verb say, you don't have to, actually you can't put any person after the word say. It has to come by itself. So that's the start of this. Then the next thing that I want you to know is that in reported speech, pronouns and possessives usually change to keep the speaker's original meaning. So another way to say this is that pronouns and possessives change to show the point of view of the storyteller, not the point of view of the people in the story, the point of view of the speaker or the writer or the storyteller. So let's look at some examples with pronouns and possessives. If we look at this situation from the movie, as the story continues, Minty says, "Toss your gun and get off your horse." So it's kind of an interesting situation for pronouns and possessives. Imagine we're going to write this with direct speech. It's going to look like this. In this picture, maybe this is a little bit strange, but this is Minty and Gideon, and Minty and Gideon are they're in the past. Okay, so the story is happening here in the past. These are the words that they say. "Minty, my name's Harriet. Toss your gun and get off your horse." So that's what actually happened in the past. And I want you to imagine that there's a third person, an observer or a writer who's watching this. Okay. And then later, this third person, time passes and the third person wants to tell what happened in the past. And so I can write this. We already kind of showed this, but if I write this with quotation marks, I'll put it in quotation marks, "Minty!" And then Gideon said is out of the quotation marks. So this is Gideon's words and this is Tara's words. "My name's Harriet," Harriet said. So this in the quotation marks, this is Harriet's words, and Harriet said is Tara's words. "Drop your gun and get off your horse." Those are Harriet's words. So I'm kind of moving back and forth between like the people in the story talking and then like myself talking, and I use the quotation marks to show who is talking there. When we use quotation marks, anything inside the quotation marks is from the speaker's point of view in the story. And anything outside the quotation marks is from the writer's point of view. So let's look at the same thing with reported speech. Gideon called Minty's name. Harriet came out from behind a tree. She told Gideon that her name was Harriet. Harriet told him to toss his gun and get off his horse. So when I write it this way, I'm not using any quotation marks, and I've changed the words so that I'm using my own words there. That's reported speech. When we don't use quotation marks, everything is from the writer's point of view. So if I look at these two things side by side, can you see the possessive here? In the left, she said, "My name's Harriet." But on the right, because it's me talking, and I'm not Harriet, I'm going to say her name was Harriet. And again, in the story, the words that came out of her mouth were "toss your gun." That's the exact words. But when I write this, because I'm not Harriet and Gideon is not here, I'm not going to say your gun. I'm going to say his gun. And to get off, not your horse, but to get off his horse. So I'm changing the point of view here when I use the exact words and when I use reported speech. So changing the possessives there. So there's one more thing that you need to pay attention to, and this is kind of a complicated explanation, but it talks about the past and the present. Let's start with the first sentence here. In formal English, when the reporting verb is in the past, the verb in the reported speech is also in the past. And let's just stop there. So if I'm going to say, he said, she said, he told me, she told me, with those words said and told, that's the reporting verb. And when that's in the past, then it means we're going to put the whole story in the past. So the verb tenses change to show the time that the storyteller is writing or talking. So like, I'm talking to you now, but the story happened in the past. So I don't use the words that they used at this time that the story happened. Let me show you. So this is interesting. Harriet pointed her gun at him and said, "You're going to die right here on a freezing and blood-soaked battlefield." And at one point he says, you know, "What you're doing is wrong. I own you." And Harriet says, "My people are free." So we have this other little conversation. When I'm writing with this with direct speech, I move as the storyteller, I move to the present, so all of this conversation is in the past. So when these people are talking, they were talking in the present tense, but this stuff is not present anymore. From the storyteller's point of view, that's in the past. So here, if I use quotation marks, I just keep the exact same words. "You are going to die right here on this field," Harriet said. And then outside of the quotation marks, I change to my point of view, which is that's in the past. And then here, Gideon's words are in quotation marks. "I own you," Gideon told her. So own is in the present, but told her is in the past. And then when Harriet says the next thing, "My people are free," Harriet said. Those are Harriet's exact words. And then as I go back to telling the story, I use the past tense said. So I'm switching back and forth between present and past because whatever's in the quotation marks has to be exactly what they said at the time. If the verb was in the present tense when the person said it, then when we put it in quotation marks, it stays in the present tense. Let's look at the same story in reported speech. So from the writer's point of view, these words are in the past, and it looks like this. Harriet told him that he was going to die. So here it says, "You are going to die," but this changes to past. He was going to die. And Gideon told Harriet that he owned her because it was present when he said it, but now it's 100 years later. He owned her. And Harriet told him that her people were free. So at this time she used the verb are, but that is already past now. So when I explain it, I'm going to say her people were free. If the verb was in the present tense when the person said it, then the observer writes it down later from her own point of view, and the tense needs to change to the past. So if we look at these side by side, we can see that the exact words had are, the reported speech has was. The exact words had own, the reported speech had owned. The exact words had are, the reported speech had were. So this is kind of a mix of present and past, but in reported speech, I put everything in the past. I put everything in the past. So sometimes if we want to tell the story this way, we have to pay attention to the verbs and change the verbs. So that was kind of a complicated grammar lesson. Let's do a little review here. When we use quotation marks, we use 2 points of view. All of the words inside the quotation marks are the exact words that the person said at that time. The words come from the speaker's point of view. And all of the words outside the quotation marks are our words from the writer's point of view. When we report speech without quotation marks, all of the words come from our point of view, the writers, not the speakers. There's just one point of view in reported speech. And when we shift to the writer's point of view, we have to change pronouns and possessives. When we shift to the writer's point of view, we have to check verb tenses. If the speaker used the present tense at the time of speaking, that time is now in the past, then we need to change the verb to the past tense. I hope that's relatively clear. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them in our next class. And that's the end of this grammar lesson.